Welcome to Work Liberated. This is the podcast you want to listen to if the workplace being the kind of place people want to be part of is important to you. If you know something in the world of work is off and you want to improve it. If you're leading people through change and you know that the environment at work is just as important as the work you're doing. If being a leader who inspires people is important to you, you will want to listen or watch Work Liberated. Hello and welcome to Work Liberated podcast. Today we're featuring Frank Wagner from Goldsmith Stakeholder-Centered Coaching. Frank has been a teacher and a mentor of mine, and I'm so glad, Frank, to have you on today. And tell us what stakeholder-centered coaching is.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to join, Maji. It's always a pleasure seeing you, working with you. And by the way, let me just give a plug before I say anything about me one of the last things I worked with you on was you asked me to review your upcoming book, and it's titled Ignite Culture. And I was blown away with the quality of what's there. And partly one of the reasons is it resonates so well with stakeholder-centered coaching. So first of all, let me kind of introduce what stakeholder-centered coaching is by a little bit of background. You'd mentioned Goldsmith, the name Marshall Goldsmith, and Marshall has, in fact, he sent me a bio today to send to one of my clients that he's going to come do a talk for. And I mean, the recognition he's gotten is unbelievable. And I knew Marshall back in 1972 when we started a PhD program together, and that's over 50 years ago. And he is now considered, top leadership coach in the world, a top leadership guru, and all that. And all I'm doing is capturing and training people in his way of coaching very successful people to get even better. And it's called stakeholder-centered coaching. So we've been doing this now for probably over 20 years. At this point. And stakeholder-centered coaching has some parts that are not unique to the coaching world and some that are actually very unique. And at its essence, what stakeholder-centered coaching is and its differentiators are, has a heavy involvement of what we call stakeholders in the coaching process, and we measure results. And, typically in coaching, corporate coaching, they really don't have very good measurements for whether it was worth the investment and whether or not a leader really got better. And so we actually measure results by an anonymous survey by stakeholders. So that's kind of the essence of what it is, why it's called stakeholder-centered coaching. And why does our organization exist? One simple reason. We believe every employee deserves a stakeholder-centered leader. And that is the wave of the future.
What is a stakeholder-centered leader?
Well, a stakeholder-centered leader is a leader who puts together around them the involvement of every relevant stakeholder group. And if you're impacted by what they're doing, you are involving them, and you're working collaboratively with your stakeholders to basically improve things for the common good of all the stakeholders. So everybody benefits from it. I've been very fortunate in terms of having a relationship with a gentleman named Alan Mulally, who's been one of the top leaders in the world. He turned Ford Motor Company around. He led Boeing commercial at both its darkest hour when 9/11 hit and through to the time he left there. And he has a phrase he calls PGA. Now, when I first heard PGA, I thought he was talking about golf, the Professional Golfers Association. No, it's positive growth for all. So when you talk about your whole webinar series, right, and Work Liberated, is a stakeholder-centered leader liberates every person that's involved and impacted by whatever the work is that leader in that organization is doing. So, by the way, the Business Roundtable, which is one of the prestigious places, I think you have to be a CEO of a top 50 or 100 company, And they always classically describe the mission of the corporation was increase shareholder value. Well, in 2019, they changed that. Radical change.
And what
that basically involves all stakeholders.
Okay, so from your job is to generate profit to your job is to give me the difference between both.
Well, I'll just use Alan Mulally as an example. When he turned Ford Motor Company around, he came in. They were predicted to lose $17 billion. I'm going to guess the year was 2006. I could be wrong by a couple of years. And they exactly lost that amount of money. He turned them around. Now, what he did was he implemented his working together management system, which, by the way, heavily involves stakeholder-centered coaching, because he had been coached twice by Margaret Goldsmith in this methodology. And he involved everyone involved into one plan. So the union was involved. They weren't considered to be our workforce that we have to manage. They were at the table. Their bankers were at the table.
So that's what you mean by stakeholder-centered, everybody who has something to say. Right.
Well, not only something to say, but actually are impacted by what you are doing.
Yep.
In an organization.
All of the people that are dependent on you.
Yeah, and should benefit from you.
Got it.
So, it's an all-encompassing collaborative methodology.
So how did you come up with it? I mean, you went to school with Marshall Goldsmith. He wrote this amazing book called What Got You Here Won't Get You There, which we use in all of our leadership training programs. And I actually use it specifically with anybody I'm coaching or in our deep alignment. That's the first thing they have to do, because I want them to get for themselves that there's a gap between where you want to go and where you are. If you're human, there's a gap. But how did stakeholder-centered coaching get created from all that?
Well, it started back around, I'll just say the year 2000, beginning of this decade. And Marshall had, at this point in time, had been honing this methodology just by working with successful leaders. I mean, Marshall and I started our life as teachers, trainers. We did leadership development. And then Marshall started, and this is leading up to and then writing the What Got You Don't Get You There book, started coaching some these are leaders that you see them on the front of magazines. Yeah. And one thing he realized, because he's so smart, is that successful people have certain beliefs. And by the way, we all operate fundamentally based on our beliefs. And these beliefs have both an upside and a downside of highly successful people. So we started developing a methodology that both benefited and used the upside of these beliefs, but managed the downside of these beliefs. And I'll give you an example. I mean, this didn't take a PhD of Marshall Goldsmith to figure this out. Successful people actually believe they're successful. They read a press clipping. Oh, great leader. They're going to say, oh, yes, they're capturing reality. I'm a great leader, right? So what is the upside of that belief? You have a high degree of self-confidence. Now, one thing we've also discovered along the way is that a leader, if we're going to coach them, has to bring something to the table. And what they got to bring to the table are three things. They have to have enough courage, they have to have enough humility, and they have to have enough discipline. Those are the three things they need. And if they don't have those things, our methodology, which is phenomenal, it's not going to work. The methodology requires these people to have that. By the way, one of the people that Marshall coached, I've met him just on a couple of occasions, I don't really know him, is Dr. Jim Kim. This guy's won the Nobel Prize.
Wait, Dr. Jim Kim?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah,
Dr. Jim Kim, his last real public job was he ran the World Bank. And by the way, the World Bank wasn't doing too well when he came in, and they're basically trying to reduce poverty, provide funding for things all over the world. And he turned them into a phenomenally successful organization. This is one thing Dr. Jim Kim said about our methodology, stakeholder-centered coaching. Everything these people talk about is easy to understand, which I'll describe shortly. And difficult or hard to do.
Yeah.
But then he adds to that. He says, and that's what scares people. And, when I say a leader needs enough courage, is because our methodology requires courage. Also, for some leaders, it's not a courage issue, but they need humility to do this thing. And all of this, like, I don't care what you're talking about. I mean, what's on the news today? Well, in the news today is the World Cup, one of the biggest athletic events that occurs every 4 years. And by the way, there isn't a single athlete on that field that doesn't operate from a strong sense of discipline to get there.
Right.
Well, the same thing happens with leaders. To get better, it requires discipline to get better. So what Marshall did is he found a methodology. He just sort of like pieced it together over a number of years coaching a lot of people. Then he asked me to take charge of designing and training people in this coaching methodology. So that's what we did. Marshall said, he told me, Frank, I want you to train people to coach like me. And I said, certainly, Marshall. And I also said to myself, Frank Wagner, you are not a very good liar, because there's no way I'm going to train people to be like Marshall Goldsmith. I could train them in a methodology that covers most of what Marshall does, and it unbelievably successful methodology. And
it does. I've been in the training, and everybody comes, they told me on my first job, we're going to teach you what to do, but we're basically giving you the doctor's bag, and we're going to put some tools in that bag. How you use those tools is your job and your responsibility. And like you said, personal discipline, the humility and courage to continue to keep moving forward and keep moving forward and keep moving forward. So tell us a few of the, I want to hear a few of the pieces of the framework for stakeholder-centered coaching.
Right.
And then I want to hear a couple of success stories. And then I want to hear, if we have time, when it didn't go well.
Sure. Well, yeah. Well, first of all, the like anything is based upon a certain set of principles or guidelines, stakeholder-centered coaching. Yep. Now, the first one is, you might say, pretty obvious. Emphasize stakeholders in the methodology. Now, see, most coaches have an ego. In fact, everybody on the planet has an ego. Some manage it well, some don't. But a lot of, and by the more successful people have, the more they have a challenge of managing their ego. Well, the thing about stakeholder-centered coaching for coaches, it's not about the coach. So you'd mentioned responsibility. That you got the bag now of the doctor's bag, but you've got to take responsibility for what you do with it. Well, we put the responsibility on the leader and the leader stakeholders to actually manage the process of a leader getting better. It's not like, come into Frank Wagner's office and we'll have a private conversation. You're going to go out and become a better leader. Well, by the way, can that work? To some degree, yes, but it doesn't work nearly as well as involving the stakeholder in the process. Now, what does that mean to involve the stakeholders? If they're going to be involved, they got to know that they're involved. So one of the things a leader has to do in stakeholder-centered coaching is they're working to get better on something. Well, guess what? They pick a goal. Now, that's not unique to our kind of coaching. I mean, I think anybody who's hired your coaching to achieve some result. So a leader has to go public. So, Maji, you got a leader. The first leader I ever coached had to work on treating people with respect. Guess what? He had to go to his stakeholders, the people who were going to be his stakeholders, and say, I need your help. I want to become better at treating people with respect.
How did he find out he needed to work on treating others with respect?
Because that's why they got him a coach. The guy was very disrespectful.
They said, you're not treating people with respect. You need to get a coach.
Exactly.
Okay, so there was no secret.
No, management knew this person. See, this person was I'm not going to mention the company or this person. They worked for a high-tech company in Silicon Valley and worked
like Apple?
No, not Apple. I will say, if you guess, it's a clear no, I'll say no. It wasn't from Apple Computer. Now, this particular young guy, he was young. He was in his 30s, and he was considered to be the future of this whole division line of work for this high-tech company. And he was, by the way, of all the people that became his stakeholders, he was the only single person. And everyone else was married, had families. And I said, now this guy worked basically a 7-day-a-week job, right? But he had an anger issue. This is what I found out in coaching. He had an anger issue. He always had to pick up the phone and deal with a customer, situation on a Saturday. Why do I have to do this? Everyone else is, taking their kids to their softball game or whatever.
Mm.
So, he had an anger problem, and he lashed out at people. Mm. So he had to. So now think about either the courage or the humility someone would need under that circumstance to go to people, look them in the eye, and say, I want to get better at treating people with respect. Yeah. Most people would prefer to work on that, but keep it kind of private.
Or they would prefer to have a diagnosis of some life-threatening illness versus admit that they've got a problem.
Yeah. Well, yeah. This ties into the second belief of successful people we should remember all this is based upon understanding human nature that we're dealing with. Yeah. Second thing that people have a problem with is that they're in charge of their fate. Successful people like to say, oh, I'm not successful because I won the lottery. I'm successful because of me and what I bring to the table. And so remember, I am successful. I also choose. Well, it's amazing how superstitious they are and how much they will go through denial of things.
What do you mean superstitious? Like if I start treating people with respect, I might lose my mojo, and then
exactly.
I won't have my edge anymore. Yeah,
exactly.
I've seen like, this has worked for me all these years, i.e. what got you here won't get there. Yeah.
See, they're making correlations that don't exist. See, they think they're successful because they're disrespectful, right? I don't suffer fools lightly, or I don't listen, right? I'm just ahead of everybody, and let's just move on. You just listen to me, right? Wow. So they'll say, I'm a successful leader because I'm a bad listener. Now, in the history of the human race, no one has ever been a successful leader because they're a bad listener. But you know what? That's in the self-report in the back of these people's heads.
Well, I would say, so Frank, hold on a second. I would say they might not be saying I'm successful because I'm a bad listener. They would say I'm successful because I have a high sense of urgency. I'm diligent. I'll get it done. I don't waste time with the wrong things. And what they don't see is that is all of the wake of their behavior on other people.
Right. And by the way, if we go back in history, they could get away with that.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Because situations weren't as complex as they are today. I mean, somebody that only relies on their own intellect and their own intelligence, don't hold your breath. I mean, they can be somewhat successful. Yet if the goal is to be a highly successful leader, and remember, my field is very simple. Just like Dr. Jim Kim says, and anything I do is extremely simple. There's only one thing you need to be a leader, and that's that people are following you, right? And why they're following you is because you're influencing them in an effective manner. Now, by the way, choosing not to listen influences people. It just doesn't usually influence them in the right way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, and by the way, I'm not saying you listen to every single person on every subject matter, but in many cases, involving others and listening to them is a positive form of influence, which gets them to follow you in the direction you're heading.
Yep.
Right. So, I mean, you've got a nice little. What is that behind you, Maji? There's a picture behind you.
Oh, a compass.
It's a compass, right?
I was like, is there a spider?
Yeah, no, is there a spider? No, there's no spider. No, and see, we use our compass because one of the other things about just human nature, I'm talking about either a leader or a follower, is we all really do have a basic need to be going somewhere. We've got a path we're following. Otherwise, if you're leaderless and rudderless, life is miserable.
Right.
So all these things we're doing. So getting back to what makes stakeholder-centered coaching is, I said the first thing is involving stakeholders. The second thing is emphasizing a term that Marshall did not invent, but he coined in our field called feed forward. Now,
let's talk about feed forward.
Okay, well, feed forward is when he first told me, I immediately figured out what it was. Before I didn't have to ask him. At least I thought I did, and I was absolutely correct. It's counter to feedback. See, feedback is the breakfast of champions. It's all over the literature historically. When I got my PhD, it's all about giving feedback, right? Feedback as a leader. Well, guess what? Successful people, you think they like getting feedback? No. Oh yeah, they do. They like to get feedback that says, you are wonderful. You are so brilliant. I can't believe, what you accomplish in life.
I think even non-successful people like to get good feedback.
Oh, sure they do.
Makes them feel better about themselves.
Well, way back in my first days as a college professor, they just come out with a magazine called Psychology Today.
Oh, yeah?
And I never forgot one cover. It showed like the platform at the Olympic Games where you got the top platform, the person who won the gold medal, and then you got one slightly lower for the silver and one slightly lower for the bronze. They had that, and it was a cartoon. And they had about 50 people all hugging each other standing on the gold medal platform. I mean, everybody thinks they're better than average and they're successful people. It's not just successful people. Successful people just have these tendencies, remember, self-confidence is a belief of success, is what comes out of successful people's belief. But the other thing can be arrogance.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And these things are just blown out into through a microscope, just blows them up into a bigger picture. Their self-confidence is higher, their arrogance is higher, right? Their superstition is higher. You'd asked about this superstition thing. They actually are worried that if they change anything that will probably help them, they won't be as successful. And that's one thing they do not want to be, is less successful this year than they were last year.
I had that fear when I was 28.
Yeah, well, tell me more about that.
Well, just, like as a young person doing extremely well in recruiting, I actually thought if I changed anything, I would lose my edge. Mm-hmm. I wanted that edge because I was super, super successful. But then I started a business and then I had employees, and that edge was good for my clients. That edge was not good for my employees. And then about 36, I started to really look at, I actually could improve and have that edge actually be better.
Sure.
And that shift is what got me into the coaching business in the first place, because I thought for myself. But I don't want to interrupt you.
No.
So I want to.
Let me finish feed forward.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Feedback is the reason why. Everyone has difficulty with, quote, feedback that's inconsistent with the way they see themselves. So if I'm seeing myself as a winner and I'm giving some criticism, it's like, this doesn't connect, right? And even if it's true, it's worse if it's true, right? And so the same token is, you can't do anything about the past. That's what feedback is, always about what happened yesterday or 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, and then people feel bad.
And what is feed forward? It has nothing to do with the past. It has to do, what could you do tomorrow differently?
What I want you to do next time.
Yeah. So,
behave next time.
Yeah. See, it's basically a suggestion. That's what, as soon as Mark said feed forward, I'm thinking suggestion. So we spent more time focusing our leaders on tomorrow, not yesterday. Now, when I say emphasize feed forward is our principle, it doesn't mean disregard feedback. It's just a much more emphasis on tomorrow and what you're going to do type of thing. And then the last thing, which will lead to what we specifically do, is our job is to change behavior. We're not here. Our type of work it does impact mindset and all these kinds of things, but we just start at the behavior level. What are you doing?
Right. And how long does it take to typically change one behavior?
Well, we never are changing just one behavior, except for we have usually one goal. And our belief is I am not convinced someone is going to actually change for a year.
Yeah, that's what.
This is not like you can get 6-pack abs, young man, by doing this exercise for 2 weeks, right? Or you can lose 50 pounds in 3 days by doing this.
I find it interesting. We get calls at Keen Alignment quite often. We'd like you to coach somebody for 3 months or for 6 weeks. And I automatically say, well, we can't. First of all, we don't do that. But second of all, people will take your money, but you're not going to get your result, because that behavior has been in place for however many years that person's been alive. Mm-hmm. And whether it was Stephen Covey or Jack Canfield, 28 days to change a behavior. I don't know where those guys got that, because it's not real.
Well, it is true, Maji. They're absolutely speaking the truth. What they're not saying is where's this person going to be 6 weeks later? It's like, how easy is it to quit smoking? It's super easy to quit smoking.
You just stop.
How does it stick?
Right.
I mean, people that have an addiction quit all the time. And they just keep, like a rubber band, boom, snap right back. They still got the addiction. They still smoke. They still doing cocaine, whatever. It's a very, very hard process to change. Now, so that's our third principle. Our final principle is changing behavior, which is hard, and changing perception, which is, and this is why the stakeholders are involved too, is they've got to change too.
Wait, say that again. Slow the roll on that one.
The stakeholders have to change along with the leader, because a leader could become, I'll just use examples. A leader could become much more respectful, right? A leader could become a much better listener. Yet the people around them think they're a disrespectful person. They think they're a bad listener. How hard is it for them to change their opinion of that person?
Yeah.
Right. So the whole system has to change around them. And see, everyone needs to take the right responsibility and accountability for their actions.
That's right.
So the stakeholders are asked to support this leader, point out when they're doing a good job, point out when they're not doing a good job, be willing to kind of treat them from what they're seeing now and not thinking too much about the past.
Yeah.
If your own evolution as a leader is important to you, you want to check out Evolve the Leader Within. Just scroll down, click the link, and learn more of how you can up-level your leadership and cultivate your highest and best self at work and in every other area of life.
Beginning again. That's one of the things in the coactive leadership model. It's begin again. And when we work with people on culture, Frank, what we work on in our deep alignment is, are we committed to focusing on going forward, or are we committed to staying in the past, being upset about things that happened 6 months ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago? Because if you're holding a grudge against your boss for a day that they had a bad day, or maybe bad behavior or whatever, you're also holding grudges against everybody else in your life. And so this changing perspective, I want to really underline it, because that is a piece of culture. And, I have a client whose name shall be secret, but she is a real go-getter, and she has people working on 15 different, completely disparate things at a time, because she's really driven to make a difference in the world. And she wants to change because she knows she's retiring in the next few years. And the people around her are like, well, you know how she is. You know how she is. That's just how she is. And I said, well, if she wants to change, why wouldn't you support her in changing? Why wouldn't you ask her when she says things are going to be different? I'm going to step back. I'm going to step out of the limelight. And then her old behavior shows up as being in the limelight. Why wouldn't you say to her, hey, let's check in. Do you realize you said this, but you're being that? How do you want to get feedback? But instead, what people do is they'll go to each other and say, see, I told you she wouldn't change. See, I told you she wouldn't change. And I think that is, first of all, it's irresponsible. And I also think it's pervasive in that person's life everywhere, that they put people in a box. There's a great book called Leadership and Self-Deception, and they leave them in the box. Once a failure, always a failure. Once a hard ass, as I would say, or disrespectful, always that way. And if a person truly wants to change, I actually really believe in my heart of hearts, it's why I do the work I do, they can. But everybody has to be in it together. So sorry, I was just,
No, that you're right. You're right on. And it's, I've got example after example after example of what you just said is true. People can change. They do change, and it leads to just a much better life. Yeah. And so let me now quickly, with that background, let me explain, because now people listening can get a concept of what I described, why it's so powerful.
Well, let's recap though what we've said so far. What is the person getting the coaching? What are the three things they need? And then what are the principles?
Okay, yeah, the three things they need to bring to the table. And by the way, because you said, well, Frank, do they work on one behavior? they're going to work on something like being a better collaborator, holding people accountable. That's their, you might say, the main focus of my work with them. Yet they're also exercising the muscles of courage, humility, and discipline at the same time.
Yeah.
So this is all interconnected on this. So the leader needs, even to get started, enough courage, enough humility, and enough discipline. The principles that we developed around stakeholder-centered coaching, based upon Marshall's work, is that we involve stakeholders. It's more about them than us. And they become the real day-to-day coaches versus us. Second thing is we emphasize the future much more in the past, and we call it emphasize feed forward versus feedback. And the third principle is we change behavior and perception in parallel. They both have to occur at the same time, and that all takes time to become the new reality for people. So now here's how we do it.
Yeah.
A leader, the first thing we do is we work with a leader to choose a goal. Sometimes, most of the time involves doing some form of data gathering, right? 360s, behavioral interviews, whatnot. And then the leader then uses that to choose what I want to focus on. And then once they've done that, then we have the leader choose, well, who do you think are the right people to get involved in these? We call them stakeholders. See, no one is stakeholder until the leader has a goal. Marshall worked years ago with a large financial institution of a international automobile company, and he coached the president, CEO, and then later they asked me to coach the chief operating officer. The chief operating officer was seen as a bottleneck, so he had to learn to be a more effective delegator. So he worked on delegation. Now, once he picked the goal of delegation, I said, well, this is always simple when you pick something like delegation. We know who your stakeholders are. They're your direct reports. So all his direct reports were stakeholders. It went really, really well. In fact, the good news is this guy is now retired. I learned that on LinkedIn not too long ago, but he became the next CEO of this organization. A couple of years after coaching him, I get a phone call. Frank, would you come in and coach our new chief financial officer? I said, okay, why? And they said, well, Japan told us to fire the prior CFO. I never asked why. And they said, get someone from outside of the automobile industry. So they went to Wall Street. Now, personally, I think could have been a bit of a mistake. At least it made a challenge for this new CFO. This CFO never even didn't own a car. The guy lived in Manhattan, right? He took either taxis or subways to work, right? Everyone else on the executive team loved cars. I mean, I think they had motor oil in their bloodstream, right? This guy didn't even know, whether a car had 2 wheels or 4 wheels, right? So I'm doing my interviewing to help him pick his goal. Turns out what he had to work on, building relationships with his peer group.
Yeah.
Now, remember, we didn't have a set of stakeholders till we had the goal. Now, his goal was the opposite of the first guy I coached that had direct reports. His was the other 9 members of the executive team that he was working on. So you don't pick stakeholders. They're the ones that have to be most relevant to what the leader is working on.
Yeah.
Okay, so step one is not just picking a goal, it's picking stakeholders. That's kind of unique to us because most coaching doesn't involve stakeholders. Then the last part of this is they have to meet with their manager to go over the goal and the stakeholder list and get their approval. Okay, that's step one.
Yeah, so there's accountability built in to the entire coaching model. That's one of the reasons at Keen Alignment we love stakeholder-centered coaching, because otherwise you're coaching people in a vacuum and you're only getting their perspective of how good they're doing or what their challenges are, and mostly their challenges are with other people.
Mm-hmm. Remember, leadership is a phenomenon. You can't be a leader without it being an interpersonal situation. Yeah. In terms of that. So the second thing then is now the leader has to go swallow their pride, go to their stakeholders and enroll the stakeholders. Now, remember, just because we pick someone's on a stakeholder list, what does that mean? They don't know they're a stakeholder. They don't know what the leader's working on. So the leader has to go in, either the leader or the coach or together, they go to these new stakeholders. It's a volunteer experience. They ask them for help. They share their goal. We explain to them what a good stakeholder is. And then the last thing is asked of them is, could you send 2 suggestions, feed forward on how they're going to achieve this goal, right? Now, step 3 is building what we call a stakeholder-based action plan. Now, I think most tasks, you can have a goal, but you need some sort of a plan, right? So our action plan are the behaviors that this leader is going to implement to achieve improving in this goal, whether it's treating people with respect, right? Listening, collaborating, delegating, whatever it is. We build the action plan as the coach with the leader based upon, as best we can, the input from the people that are actually impacted by it and are giving ideas on how to do a better job. So we build an action plan, and then the action plan gets sent out to the stakeholders. So by the way, so what is public here in this situation in coaching? The leader's goal is public and their action plan is public. These are the, say, half dozen behaviors I'm going to use now so that I will become more respectful or be a better listener.
Yeah,
So
what I remember about going through the training, now that I'm listening to you again in this way, isn't your whole logo on stakeholder-centered coaching, isn't that a compass? And then inside each piece of the compass is what you're doing?
It's the exact same shape of the compass. It's a circle, right? And in the middle of the circle is, for the leader, the middle of the circle, you might say, is myself. I got to manage my beliefs. Yep, there you go.
That humility, courage, and discipline.
That's the leader's middle of their compass, right? I got to demonstrate and practice and exercise my courage, my humility, and my discipline. Then the stakeholders are the people that are going to be providing the day-to-day feedback and feed forward to the leader. And they're the people that at the choice points are going to get an anonymous survey. We call it a mini survey to assess, is this leader improving?
And what are those points? 3 months in, 2 months in, 6 weeks?
It varies by our different coaches use a different methodology. I have a pretty common one. I coach a leader for a year. I do it at 6 months and I do it at a year.
Yeah, good.
And remember, in the 6 month actually is a wonderful thing, but it doesn't count. It only counts at the end. Right. What they score at the end.
Right. And then, and how often are the stakeholders giving the thumbs up or the thumbs down? Because I know it's a pretty simple scoring system. Is Maji better at having less meetings, or is Maji worse at having less meetings?
Yeah. Well, see,
those stakes.
Yes. There's what I call the informal times this occurs, and there's the formal times it occurs. See, this is where the discipline part comes in. See, then this is step 4. Remember, step 1 is they got a goal, stakeholders, agreement. Step 2, they enroll the stakeholders. Step 3, they build an action plan. Now the real work takes place in step 4, implementing the action plan and checking in, following up with stakeholders. We've got so much research that shows the best way to change both behavior and perception is follow-up. So we require the leader to follow up with each stakeholder personally once a month.
Call or
no? It can be on the phone. It can be on a Zoom. At the end of a Zoom meeting, it can be face-to-face. It doesn't matter.
But you don't want text or email.
No. Well, when I coach someone for a year, and like for instance, they're really on the road doing some sort of a road show, and they've been doing it religiously for 8 months. I say this month, just do it by email. But I'm not going to let anybody hide behind email.
Connection with people.
Absolutely. So they follow up once a month. And by the way, this is not a meeting. It's minutes. This is a very focused conversation with a person. By the way, it can happen when you've been having a meeting with this person around business stuff. Yeah. But you just say, I need 5 minutes at the end of this meeting. Can I have it? Sure. Okay, now that the 5 minutes are up, I'm trying to be a better collaborator. You know my action plan. What have you noticed in the last 30 days? Capture. But we put them through charm school. How to ask, how to listen, how to say thank you, how to show gratitude, right?
Wait, I have to ask right there. The only comment to ever give when somebody gives you feedback or feed forward is
I want you to answer so I can.
Thank you.
So I can say thank you for being a good practitioner. Yeah. Yes. The only thing you say is thank you. And by the way, the thank you is not to do that. Oh, this is the greatest idea I've ever heard in my life. Thank you for you having the courage and willingness to help me.
Yeah.
It's like Christmas. I mean, Christmas is coming up this month. Someone gets a gift. What do you say when someone gives you a gift?
Yeah, thank you.
Now, you don't say stinky gifts, worst gifts.
The feedback.
Right? You say, oh, Manji, thank you for that gift. I can really use that to re-gift to someone else. You think is that what they want to hear? No, you show gratitude for getting that, from getting that help from the person.
Yeah.
So the main all the work that's done in our fourth step, implementing your plan and following up with your stakeholders. And then the final step is that measurement piece. So it's really a 5-step process of stakeholder-centered coaching.
Okay.
Now, let me give you a couple of examples. You asked for some examples. I was, goes back just a couple of years. I was brought in to coach the CFO of a large public utility in the Midwest of the United States. And the reason why I was brought in is they had a set of values, and they had one value was number one. It wasn't here's 5 values and they're all equal. No, number one value, caring. And then they had stuff behind what caring meant. Here was the problem. The CFO was probably the second most prominent person in the organization, was seen as a perfect poster child of non-caring. And they said, and so it was a CHRO who I first talked to. Then I talked to the CEO. And by the way, why was I brought in? This behavior was going on for a long time. I was brought in because they finally bit the bullet when this guy, CFO, basically took apart the chairman of the board in a board meeting. And now it's
then the chairman of the board is like, he better get coaching or he's out.
Yeah. So I get brought in to coach the guy. Right now, by the way, we did our due diligence. I'm assessing whether I'm going to work with this guy or not, because if I didn't think this guy was really willing to change, I'm not going to invest my time and energy and effort and over this thing. So I assessed he was ready to change. Right. So here's his problem. And by the way, I realized this when I first assessed. I flew there. This is before COVID. In fact, some of the coaching took place during COVID, during the first part of it. So, he didn't have very many live interactions with his stakeholders. And so when I'm seeing the guy, I noticed one word I could describe the guy: very charming. I mean, this guy could basically come across as
charming CFO.
Yeah. And by smart guy, I mean, he could have been the next CEO at that time, as far as I was concerned. He really had a business sense, and he had all the charm and all that kind of stuff. But here's the thing: if something happened a certain way, there was like a light switch went off in his head, and he became like ruthless.
Triggered.
He's triggered on this thing.
Triggered.
So that's really what he had to work on. Well, I'll just go to the end of this story. At the end of the story, we measure results. Unbelievable improvement. Every single stakeholder saw him as getting better, and some pretty dramatically getting better after a year. I had him do an after action review of how things went. And I said, this is your story of what you did over the year, because I want you to remember what you did over the year. And I suggest you might send a copy to the CEO. So he sends a copy to the CEO. This is a woman, tough woman, very good leader, but very tough. She calls me up. The CHRO calls me and says, we need to have a little Zoom meeting between the three of us, you, me, and the CEO. I'm going, okay. And I knew it was good results, so I wasn't anticipating anything negative. She blew me away with what she said. She opened the meeting by saying, "You're my new best friend." And I spent no time with her besides interviewing at the very beginning of this. See, I try to stay in the background. It's not about the coach. It's about the leader taking responsibility, the stakeholders taking responsibility, being accountable for each other, and changing.
Yeah.
Stakeholders change their perception. He changed his behavior.
Good.
Right. So success. She also said, this is what she said that blew me away. I almost cried reading his after action assessment. I mean, talk about a success story on that. By the way, did not start off well. Let me give you another example, probably a worst scenario. I was brought in, this is a large retailer basically in the state of Texas. And the grandson of the founder is the chairman of the board. And I'm brought in to coach this woman. She's on the C level of the organization. and works in the corporate headquarters. And when the president and the CHRO talked to me about her, this woman I'm going to go coach, they said, Frank, little known interesting fact about her, she has fired 3 bosses. I'm going, wait, I'm confused here. I've never heard of anybody firing their boss. I guess that means I quit. No, she was still there. And by the way, every one of the bosses she fired was in the C-suite over time. This is over time. I'm going, okay, this is interesting. And they said, oh yeah, Frank. And she just fired her last coach. Her last coach was a psychiatrist, and she fired him on the spot when he told her you should be on drugs. So I'm flown to Texas to meet this woman, right? And I'm going to describe stakeholder-centered coaching to her. And so I described stakeholder-centered coaching to her. And by the way, I did this in a polite way, but a very direct way, looking at her face and say, you may not have enough courage, humility, or discipline to do this. I'm going to fly home. I don't want to hear from you till at least Monday, and you decide whether you want me to work with you. Well, guess what? I obviously worked with her. She called me up on Monday and said, I want to go to work. I said, great. So I worked with her. Now, all 3 of the women she had fired that she had reported to one time were on the stakeholder list. And by the way, she was willing to bite the bullet and do all this.
Good.
I'm at the United Nations in New York, and the phone rings. I've got my little mobile phone. My phone rings. I pick it up as hello, and this woman introduces herself, gives the name of the company. Okay, I know she's a stakeholder. I know the name. I've never met this lady, and she says, "Now you're coaching so and so." I said, "Yes," and I've been asked to be a stakeholder. I said, "Well, I know you're on the list." She says, "Well, I don't want to do it." I said, okay. And then I'm sitting to myself going like, what do I say next? Fortunately, I just didn't say anything. And then so she adds on, she says, you probably don't know this, but she fired me once. And I'm going, oh, I didn't admit that I knew it. I just kept my silence. She says, I have a terrible relationship with this woman. But you know what? It's probably the best it's ever been. I don't want to jeopardize that by being a stakeholder. I'm sitting to myself going, you got to be kidding me. I was biting my tongue not to laugh at this lady, but I just stopped and I said, it is a volunteer experience. You do not have to be the stakeholder. And I could just sense the relief on the other side of the phone. This thing I said in closing, I said, you know what? I'm going to be coaching her for a year. Anytime you want to come back, you're invited. So I hung up. Guess what? 3 months later, she became a stakeholder. Because she saw the progress this woman was doing.
Why?
Well, because remember, everybody talks, just like you said earlier, everyone talks, right? They said, oh my God, she's actually trying. No one said in 3 months she was a different person.
They said she was trying.
But she was, and by the way, the reason why she was a sacred cow there is the chairman of the board loved her. And I don't mean in a romantic sense. She was a kind of person, like a lot of the people like that woman you mentioned, he is a phenomenal philanthropist in Texas. And he will come up with this idea. She's the person that makes it real. She'll put the plan together. So she couldn't be fired. So I ended up coaching. And by the way, guess what? At the end, she got better, right? All the stakeholders get better, right? So that's what we do for a living here. I love these cases like this.
Great. So in recapping, I just want to recap one more time. If I want to use stakeholder-centered coaching with a client, that client has to be willing. They have to have the discipline, the courage, and the humility to look in the mirror and say, which is, by the way, chapter 1 of Ignite Culture, to look in the mirror and say, what's not working? What am I? And sometimes they're too nice. Sometimes they're too agreeable. They want everybody to love them. Sometimes they're too scattered and flighty. Sometimes they go to anger, and none of it works, because if we're being polarized in any of our behavior, it just doesn't work. And then the 4 steps again, Frank, are 1.
Pick a goal, then stakeholders, then get a sign off. Step 2, enroll the stakeholders. They got to know their role, right? Yeah. Step 3, remember the last part of step 2 is sending in some suggestions on how they're going to achieve the goal. Step 3 is building acting out with the fingerprints of the stakeholders on it, which goes back to them.
Yep.
Step 4, all the heavy lifting is done. You actually have to change. You got to implement the plan. You got to follow up. And then the 5th one is measuring the results.
Measure. So I just want to let everybody on Work Liberated to know that Frank can be reached at
coach.frank@gmail.com. Very simple.
Awesome.
All lowercase, just the word coach, Frank@gmail.com.
And Frank is doing 2 trainings as part of our Culture Catalyst program to teach people about stakeholder-centered coaching. So part of our Culture Catalyst program is a year-long mastermind with leaders from different companies who want to learn what the pros know and teach so they can take it into their companies. And so Frank is one of our guest teachers, and Marshall Goldsmith, that I don't know that anybody on this podcast knows, wrote the foreword for the book Ignite Culture. So if you want to get a sneak peek at Ignite Culture, you can go on keenalignment.com. A pop-up will come and you can start reading sneak peeks. The book's official launch is January 18th. And Frank, thank you so much for being here. I am so glad we're working together. And thank you for sharing stakeholder-centered coaching, which is an amazing opportunity to build transparency, to build trust in an organization, and to develop leaders and powerful followers. So thank you so much. And we appreciate your time and your energy and your love that you give to everybody you work with.
Yeah, it was always a wonderful life to be able to work with people like yourself and our clients. And I will just say one quick little thing is probably my favorite coaching assignments are working with people that are considered already great leaders and they pick a strength to get better at. So it worked there too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Frank, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right, take care.
Thank you for watching another episode of Work Liberated. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with your friends, put a comment in the comment section, and like it. Thank you so much, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.